Daniel Thompson was the devoted husband no one suspected, and Megan Sanders was the charming schoolteacher hiding a deadly obsession, but it was Claire Thompson, the unsuspecting wife, who paid the ultimate price in a love triangle that turned into a cold-blooded murder. In the heart of Maple Ridge, a picturesque town surrounded by tall oaks and neatly painted fences, lived Daniel and Claire Thompson. From the outside, they looked like the kind of couple others admired, stable, devoted, and in sync. Their life moved in harmony, shared vacations, joint savings, matching Christmas pajamas. To their friends, they seemed perfect, almost annoyingly so. Maybe something at school was bothering him. She even scheduled a weekend getaway for the two of them, hoping it might bring back the warmth they once shared. Daniel agreed to go, but canceled 2 days before, blaming an emergency parent-teacher conference. Claire didn't cry, but she didn't try again either. They weren't the kind of couple that argued publicly or canceled plans last minute. Megan wanted more than hotel rooms and stolen weekends. She wanted Daniel full-time. She pressured him to leave Claire. She noted inconsistencies late nights that didn't match the school calendar. Receipts in his coat pocket from restaurants she'd never visited. Still, she said nothing. Not because she had accepted it, but because she didn't yet know what to do. Neighbors still waved to each other on morning walks. Children still played in front yards. No one suspected what was brewing behind the doors of the Thompson home. No one could have imagined that beneath the painted shutters and blooming garden, a deadly plan was beginning to form. She began to suffer from insomnia. Her work started slipping. She forgot a client meeting, something she'd never done before. She stared out windows longer than usual, waiting for Daniel's car to pull into the driveway, hoping maybe just once. He'd come home early with a simple gesture, flowers, a hug, an apology, but that day never came. She hinted that their relationship couldn't remain a secret forever. And Megan was no longer content with waiting. Her texts became aggressive. Her tone changed. She said things that unsettled him, things about removing obstacles, about how sometimes happiness came with a price. Daniel didn't reply, but he didn't block her either. He was in too deep. At first, Daniel resisted. He didn't want a divorce. He didn't want a scandal. But Megan was persuasive, and slowly his fear turned into calculation. He was gone, emotionally detached and physically involved elsewhere. He had met someone, it just happened. But as the affair deepened, he found himself pulled toward Megan like gravity. She listened to him. She made him feel younger, more alive. Claire, he began to think, didn't understand him anymore. It was a dangerous story, he told himself, one that painted him as a victim and justified his betrayal. Her name was Megan Sanders, a new literature teacher at the same school. Megan had recently moved to Maple Ridge after her divorce. She was younger than Claire by nearly 10 years, with piercing green eyes, long blonde hair, and a quiet confidence that made people lean in when she spoke. Daniel was drawn to her immediately. It started with casual lunches, then secret messages, and finally, long, intimate nights at a small motel just outside town. Instead, they posted anniversary photos on social media, complete with heartfelt captions and carefully chosen filters. But perfection, as it often is, was only a surface. It was locked. That was new. Her stomach turned. She began to watch him more closely. She noticed the change in his cologne, the way he started working out again, the sudden interest in dressing sharper on workdays. Her mind began to spin. She thought about confronting him, but what would she say? What if she was wrong? Still, the suspicion festered. She became quieter around him, not out of strategy, but because she didn't recognize the man sleeping beside her anymore. Their 2-story brick home on Willow Lane was always well kept, with a perfectly mowed lawn, seasonal wreaths on the door, and solar lights that glowed warmly at night. Daniel was a high school English teacher respected by students and staff alike. He wore cardigans, carried leather-bound books, and spoke softly even in chaos. Claire, an event planner, brought color and energy to every gathering she organized. She was known for her radiant smile, kindness, and meticulous attention to detail. The Thompsons had been married for 12 years. They met in college, fell in love quickly, and married before either turned 30. Claire had begun to notice changes. They were small at first. Daniel, who used to come home and ask about her day, now slipped into the living room and scrolled through his phone. He used to bring her coffee every morning. That stopped. When she mentioned it, he said he'd been busy. He often stayed late at school, citing extra meetings and paperwork. He started locking his phone, something he had never done in all the years they'd been together. Claire pretended not to notice. She tried to focus on her work, organizing weddings and baby showers, but the unease crept in like a slow, invisible tide. She didn't tell anyone, not her sister, not her best friend. Instead, she convinced herself it was a phase, that maybe Daniel was overwhelmed. What she didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just drifting. Daniel didn't plan to cheat. That's what he told himself. Claire's instincts sharpened. One evening, while Daniel showered, she picked up his phone from the kitchen counter. At school, Daniel and Megan kept up appearances, but behind closed doors. They talked about everything, how they felt trapped, how unfair life was, how Claire didn't understand Daniel, and how they deserved happiness. Back home, Claire started tracking Daniel's schedule. Daniel felt the walls closing in. Megan was demanding more time, more promises. Claire was growing colder, more observant. He couldn't balance it much longer. In the town of Maple Ridge, the sun still rose over quiet streets. The perfect couple wasn't perfect anymore, and one of them wouldn't live to see the truth revealed. Megan Sanders had arrived in Maple Ridge less than 2 years before, hoping to escape the shadows of a bitter divorce. She left behind a life filled with disappointment, moving across state lines for a fresh start and a new teaching job at Maple Ridge High School. Daniel noticed her the first day she walked into the teacher's lounge. She was wearing a pale blue dress and had her hair pinned back. Daniel began to lie more convincingly to Claire. He told her he had after-school tutoring sessions or administrative meetings. She began to question him about Claire, about the marriage, about the timeline for ending it. In her mind, Claire was the problem, the one standing in the way of the life she deserved. Megan wanted Daniel all to herself. She envisioned a life where they lived openly, traveled together, and built something new. When Daniel hesitated, she reminded him of their connection, their chemistry, their future. She said Claire didn't deserve him. She said Claire was in the way. Daniel always gave vague answers. He said it was complicated, that Claire would be devastated, that they needed to be careful. Meetings in her car where they whispered so no one could hear. Daniel provided details when Claire would be alone, how to disable the alarm, which door to leave unlocked. Megan planned the rest. She believed Daniel was distant, maybe unfaithful, but murder wasn't in her realm of thought. She still packed his lunch in the morning. She still folded his shirts and laid out clean towels. She didn't see the danger that Megan had become. She didn't hear the whispers of her own name in secret conversations. She didn't feel the target on her back growing larger with each passing day. She read articles online, watched crime documentaries, studied mistakes other criminals had made. She bought gloves, a hoodie, and shoes she wouldn't mind throwing away. The lights flickered. The television buzzed. Megan turned to him and said something that made Daniel's heart stop. He had allowed the idea to grow, and now it surrounded him like thick smoke. He stopped sleeping beside Claire. He spent hours alone in his car, staring at nothing. No one knew that in the shadows of a suburban street, two people were planning something unthinkable. No one suspected that soon everything would change. Megan kept him focused, kept reminding him that this was the only way. He would thank her later, she said. They would disappear together, move to a new place, start over. She painted a future so vividly that he couldn't look away. She told him that maybe they didn't need to wait for Claire to leave. Maybe Claire didn't need to be part of the story anymore. The room went silent after her words. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He looked away, tried to change the subject. But Megan pressed on. She said she was serious. She said they could make it look like an accident, a robbery gone wrong. It would be quick. Clean. No one would suspect them. But Megan was growing impatient. Her texts turned demanding. She started showing up unannounced, once even parking down the street from the Thompson house just to watch. During that time, he couldn't sleep. He looked at Claire differently, guilty and distant. Every sound in the house made him tense. He wasn't a killer. He told himself that over and over. But Megan's words echoed in his mind. He thought about their future, about being free from the lies and the guilt. And slowly, horrifyingly, he began to see Megan's suggestion not as madness but as a possibility. Megan would wait in her car around the corner or book cheap motel rooms under fake names. Every stolen moment fed their obsession. What had once been simple attraction became an emotional fire that neither of them wanted to put out. She looked elegant, composed, and entirely different from the familiar comfort of his home life. Over the next few weeks, their conversations deepened. They laughed about outdated textbooks, complained about the administration, and exchanged personal stories over coffee. Her arrival was quiet, her demeanor polite, but there was an intensity in her eyes that never quite fit the town's gentle rhythm. Most people saw her as mysterious but charming, young, attractive, and deeply private. She didn't make many friends among the staff, but Daniel Thompson quickly became the exception. It started innocently enough. They worked on the same floor, shared similar interests in literature, and often found themselves chatting between classes. What began as friendly camaraderie gradually turned into something else. Daniel found himself thinking about Megan outside of school. He noticed the way she looked at him, the way her hand brushed his when they reached for the same paper, the way she lingered in the hallway after class. He hadn't felt desired in years, and Megan's attention filled a void he hadn't realized was consuming him. One afternoon, after a faculty meeting, they shared their first kiss in the back of her car. It was fast, impulsive, and completely unforgettable. From that moment on, the boundaries fell away. Their meetings became regular, deliberate. Megan was not content with secrecy. The affair filled her with power and purpose, but it also left her feeling hollow when Daniel returned home to his wife every night. Daniel tried to calm her down, but Megan had already begun to spiral. The dangerous shift came one night during a storm. Rain poured down in sheets as Megan and Daniel sat in her apartment. Daniel left shortly after, shaken but silent. He didn't call her for 2 days. When he finally contacted Megan again, he didn't say no. That was enough for her. They began to discuss it in code, text messages that hinted at a plan. Daniel still had doubts, but by then he was trapped. Meanwhile, Claire continued to live in a house where danger was blooming in silence. She was worried, yes, but not afraid. And all around them, life in Maple Ridge continued. The trees rustled, dogs barked, mail was delivered. Neighbors smiled and waved. Daniel stood in front of his classroom, reading poetry aloud to a group of uninterested teenagers, but his mind wasn't there. Every word he spoke felt automatic. Every bell that rang startled him. His thoughts were entirely consumed by what lay ahead. He barely spoke to Claire. She noticed his silence but didn't press. Part of her had given up trying to understand what had changed between them. Daniel left early in the morning, telling Claire he'd be driving to a regional educator seminar. The motel room was bare and cold. He paced the floor, glancing at his phone every few seconds. She wore black jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers. Her face was hidden beneath a mask and cap. She walked briskly, confidently, like she belonged there. It was just after 6 p.m., and the sun was beginning to set. The neighborhood was quiet. Kids were inside having dinner. He dropped his phone and sat on the edge of the motel bed, trembling. No one responded. They entered through the back and found the chaos upstairs. The scene was disturbing. The bedroom looked ransacked. Blood stained the carpet. Jewelry, cash, and electronics were untouched. There were signs of staging. A broken vase that looked placed rather than knocked over. A drawer left open with clothes still neatly folded inside. The forced entry didn't match the pattern of a real burglary. And Claire's body showed signs of a struggle that suggested personal violence, not random aggression. Claire's body was cold. Detectives arrived soon after. Daniel pulled up at 10:03 p.m., breathless and wide-eyed, pretending to be in shock. He dropped to his knees in the driveway, screaming Claire's name. Neighbors gathered behind the police tape, some crying, others stunned, the perfect couple, torn apart by tragedy. It was real now. There was no turning back. Every second that passed took him further from his old life and deeper into something monstrous. He waited 2 more hours before calling the police. He stuck to his story, insisting he had been out of town. He provided receipts, motel records, and his phone's GPS data. It all checked out. But something in his eyes gave him away an emptiness, a mechanical sadness that didn't match the loss of a spouse. The detectives didn't have enough to arrest him, but they had enough to dig deeper. He pretended to be frantic. He told them he had tried to call Claire but couldn't reach her. He told them something felt wrong. He begged them to send someone to check the house. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Megan was on her way. She had texted him one word, "Ready?" Daniel felt sick. He knew there was still time to stop it. The sliding back door was unlocked, just as Daniel had promised. She entered slowly, careful not to make noise. The house was dimly lit. She moved through the kitchen and living room like a shadow. Claire's friends shared stories of her warmth, her laughter, her dreams of starting a family. No one could understand why someone would want her dead. Everyone looked for answers. And soon, the police would begin to find them. Claire was upstairs in the master bedroom. She was folding laundry, humming softly to herself. She didn't hear the footsteps below. She didn't notice the figure creeping up the stairs. He could call Claire, warn her, confess everything, but he did nothing. He sat in silence as the clock ticked toward disaster. There were no screams loud enough to reach the neighbors. No chance for Claire to fight back. Megan used a blunt object Daniel had hidden beneath the bed. When it was over, Claire lay lifeless on the floor, a peaceful expression still on her face. Megan stood over her, breathing heavily, then began staging the scene. She opened drawers, knocked over a vase, and broke a lamp to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. She sprayed water around to smear fingerprints and wiped surfaces clean with a cloth. She left through the same door she entered, retracing her steps back to her car. The entire ordeal lasted less than 20 minutes. He packed a bag with books and notebooks to sell the illusion. Claire kissed him goodbye on the cheek, and for a moment Daniel froze. He hadn't expected the tenderness. She told him to be careful on the road. He nodded without speaking and walked out the door, heart pounding in his chest. She still cooked his meals and folded his laundry, but the warmth between them had turned cold. She often sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the window, wondering how her marriage had unraveled so fast. The house felt like it was shrinking. She found herself unable to sleep, waking often in the night to check the locks and windows. She couldn't explain the sense of dread building inside her. The plan he once found unthinkable was now creeping closer to reality. Every time he looked at Claire, he wondered if she somehow knew. But she didn't. She moved through her days like everything was normal, completely unaware of the knife hovering above her. Megan, on the other hand, was calm, almost eerily so. She was fully committed to the plan. She bought cheap black clothes from a thrift store, gloves, and a ski mask. She mapped out her route to the house. She rehearsed her steps in her apartment like an actor preparing for a final scene. Megan had finalized everything. All he had to do was follow through. The date was set, Friday. Claire would be home alone, and Daniel would be attending a fake conference out of town, giving him an airtight alibi. Megan would do the rest. The week leading up to it felt like a blur. Daniel couldn't focus at work. Daniel felt it too, but for him it was different. It was guilt, anxiety, and fear tangled together. Friday arrived with a clear sky and an unusual warmth for late autumn. As he drove to a small motel on the outskirts of town, he kept checking his mirrors, convinced someone was following him. Back in the neighborhood, Megan parked her car 3 blocks away from the Thompson house. She slipped into the backyard, staying close to the fence. What happened next was quick and brutal. Megan struck fast, catching Claire off guard. The struggle was short. Daniel received the message just after 6:30 p.m. It simply read, "Done." Police arrived at 9:12 p.m. The front door was locked. But the detectives weren't easily convinced. Something about the scene felt off. Nothing of value had been taken. The next morning, they brought Daniel in for questioning. Claire's death rocked Maple Ridge. The news spread quickly. Vigils were held. Flowers piled up in front of the Thompson house. The investigation into Claire Thompson's murder officially began the morning after her body was discovered. Detectives combed through the scene once more in daylight, looking for anything they may have missed the night before. From the start, something didn't sit right with them. The house was too clean, too staged. The signs of forced entry were inconsistent with a real break-in, and the lack of stolen items raised immediate suspicion. Claire's jewelry lay untouched on her dresser. Her handbag still had cash and credit cards. Even a laptop sat undisturbed on the kitchen table. But forensic analysis of Daniel S. phone and a warrant for Megan S. data helped recover small pieces of conversations that hinted at a romantic relationship. She denied having an affair with Daniel and insisted they were only colleagues. She said the messages were taken out of context, part of a miscommunication, but under pressure, her story began to crack. Investigators showed her photos of Daniel and her at a cafe outside town. He admitted to the affair, to the planning, and to the lies. He said he never wanted Claire to die, that it was Megan who pushed him to the edge. He described the meetings, the plan to make it look like a robbery, and how he had left the back door open for Megan to enter. He claimed he thought Megan might back out at the last minute, that he never believed she would actually go through with it. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. Megan refused to plead guilty. She went to trial, where the evidence was overwhelming. Her calm demeanor on the stand only made things worse. The jury took less than 3 hours to find her guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They revealed security footage from a gas station where Megan was seen buying gloves and black clothing. Still, she refused to admit anything. But the pain of her loss lingered like a scar across the town. The house on Willow Lane was eventually sold, its new owners unaware of its dark history. Yet for those who had known Claire, the horror could never be forgotten. In the end, what began as a simple betrayal turned into something far worse, a gruesome murder that shattered lives and exposed just how deadly love, obsession, and lies can become. The town of Maple Ridge was stunned. The story exploded across local news and online forums. People who once admired Daniel as a gentle, dedicated teacher now saw him as a cowardly manipulator. Megan was portrayed as the cold-hearted mistress, willing to kill to have what she wanted. The couple that once seemed so perfect was now destroyed, both by betrayal and blood. Some of them suggested discontent with Claire. Others discussed vague plans, meeting times, and locations. Her sister described Claire as someone full of life, someone who deserved better. The community, too, mourned in disbelief. They had watched this couple host block parties, attend church together, and wave cheerfully on morning walks. Now, their home stood dark and empty, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind closed doors. Investigators also recovered partial shoe prints near the back door prints that matched a rare brand of sneakers Megan was known to wear. Investigators uncovered notes Megan had written in a journal, outlining her hatred for Claire and her desire to eliminate her. There were chilling entries that showed just how far she had fallen into obsession. One read, "If she's gone, he'll finally be mine. He just needs help seeing that." Another page included sketches of Claire's house, entries about timing, and a disturbing checklist. It became clear that the murder wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a calculated act driven by jealousy and entitlement. Daniel, meanwhile, began to unravel. The pressure of the investigation, the loss of control, and the growing weight of guilt began to crack his calm exterior. He was called in for another round of questioning. This time, detectives confronted him with the messages. The surveillance, the hair evidence, and Megan's connection to the crime. They told him they knew everything. More troubling, a neighbor's security camera had captured a blurry image of a hooded figure walking briskly down the sidewalk on the night of the murder, right around the time Claire was killed. The timestamp aligned with Megan's travel history. One particular thread, recovered from Megan's phone, sent alarm bells ringing. A message from Megan read, "This is the only way we can be free." Another from Daniel, just days before the murder, said, "It has to look real, no mistakes." It was clear to the investigators that robbery hadn't been the motive. Someone had come there with only one goal, to kill Claire. The medical examiner's report deepened the mystery. Claire had been struck several times in the head with a heavy object. He offered help to the investigation, made public appeals for information, and even participated in a candlelight vigil. But behind closed doors, investigators noted his calmness. too calm for a man who had just lost his wife to a violent crime. They began piecing together a timeline. The force suggested rage, not random violence. There were defensive wounds on her arms, deep scratches under her fingernails, and bruises on her wrists. The killer had been up close and personal. This wasn't a quick hit and escape. It was a targeted, emotional attack. The autopsy also revealed a strand of long blonde hair in Claire's clenched hand. Claire had fought back. Detectives turned their focus to those closest to Claire. Naturally, Daniel became their primary subject. Though he appeared devastated, his grief seemed scripted. Daniel's alibi seemed solid at first glance. He was checked into a motel on the night of the murder. His phone GPS confirmed he had traveled there and stayed through the evening. Security cameras captured him arriving at the front desk, signing in and walking to his room, but the detectives wanted more. They requested phone records and digital data, including deleted text messages and call logs. That's where the first major crack appeared. Daniel and Megan had exchanged hundreds of messages over the past several months. Many of them had been deleted. When detectives brought Megan in for questioning, she remained composed. Then came the forensic evidence. The hair in Claire's hand was tested. It matched Megan's DNA. As the evidence piled up, Megan's behavior shifted. She stopped cooperating. Her lawyer advised silence. Daniel broke. First came the tears, then the shaking. Finally, the confession. His confession led to Megan's arrest. She was charged with first-degree murder, and Daniel was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and being an accessory to the crime. Claire's family was devastated by the revelations. Her parents, who had always trusted Daniel, now spoke out in anger. As Daniel and Megan awaited trial, more disturbing details came to light. Daniel's trial was scheduled first. He pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the judge showed little mercy. Justice was served, but the damage remained. Claire's memory lived on in her family and friends. In the months following the trial, the town of Maple Ridge struggled to move on. Though the media attention faded, the memory of Claire Thompson's brutal murder lingered like a shadow over the neighborhood. The once quiet suburban street where she lived had become a symbol of loss and betrayal. Gone were the tailored cardigans, lesson plans, and well-spoken charm. He wrote letters to Claire's family, though they never replied. He spoke to no one about Megan. In prison, she was a name he avoided, a ghost he refused to acknowledge. But he couldn't escape her memory. She haunted his thoughts, not as the woman he loved, but as the person who helped tear his world apart. Inmates and guards alike didn't care about his past. In the eyes of the system, he was just another man who helped orchestrate a murder. Claire's case became a case study in betrayal and emotional abuse. Teachers spoke about the importance of recognizing red flags, not just in physical violence, but in control, secrecy, and obsession. The tragedy wasn't just about murder. It was about how unchecked lies and infatuation can spiral into irreversible consequences. She gave a few short interviews to journalists, always positioning herself as misunderstood. They painted the walls, changed the furniture, and replaced the flooring in the master bedroom. Her story remained etched into the fabric of the town. The echoes of what happened remained. They lived in the hearts of those who remembered Claire, in the warnings given to others, and in the choices made by a community determined to never let darkness go unnoticed again. It was a cautionary tale whispered among friends, a tragedy studied by students, and a burden carried by those who loved her. But it also became a source of resilience. Her sister's nonprofit grew over time, gaining recognition and helping women in dangerous relationships find help before things turned deadly. In her name, lives were saved. In her memory, others were protected. They brought in a dog, planted new flowers, and gave the home new life. But neighbors still crossed the street to avoid walking directly in front of it. Some said they could still feel the sadness in the air. Others believed the house had been purged of its past, ready for something good to grow again. Her family, ashamed and overwhelmed, distanced themselves. They met occasionally to share stories about her laugh, her generosity, and her creative touch. One friend recalled how Claire had once decorated an entire baby shower in less than a day when a vendor canceled last minute. Another remembered Claire staying up all night to make handmade centerpieces for a fundraiser. These memories brought some comfort, though they always ended with silence, each person grappling with the same question: how did things go so wrong? She became another name in a prison database, a file number, a statistic, but in Maple Ridge, people remembered. Her name was whispered with bitterness and disgust. Parents warned their children about trusting strangers too quickly. Her picture occasionally resurfaced in documentaries or true crime channels, but she no longer controlled the story. The evidence had spoken, and her legacy was forever tied to violence. She claimed Daniel misled her, promised her things he never intended to deliver. She painted Claire as cold, distant, and cruel, trying to recast herself as the victim of a twisted love triangle. But those interviews only further damaged her image. The public didn't see a grieving woman or a misled lover. They saw a remorseless killer trying to rewrite a horror story. Daniel kept mostly to himself, reading old classics from the prison library and avoiding conflict. But the weight of guilt never left him. He replayed the events over and over in his mind: how quickly he allowed lust to override reason, how easily he let Megan convince him to destroy everything. Neighbors who once waved from their porches now looked away when passing the Thompson house, which had been left vacant, its windows dark and curtains drawn. Children avoided walking near it. Lawn overgrowth began creeping around the edges. For sale signs came and went, but buyers were few. Something about that house repelled interest. It looked beautiful on the outside, but felt haunted. Claire's family never truly recovered. Her parents, who had always believed their daughter was safe, were devastated. They struggled to understand how someone she trusted, someone she loved, could plot her death. Claire's mother began attending grief support groups, but nothing could fill the hole left by her daughter's absence. Her father, once a cheerful man known for helping neighbors fix leaky faucets and broken sprinklers, became withdrawn and quiet. Claire's sister Emily took a more active role in seeking justice beyond the courtroom. She began a nonprofit in Claire's name, focusing on awareness of domestic betrayal and emotional manipulation, especially cases involving affairs that turn violent. She gave speeches at women's centers, appeared on local news, and worked tirelessly to ensure her sister's story wouldn't be forgotten. Meanwhile, inside the cold concrete walls of prison, Daniel Thompson adjusted to a life he had never imagined for himself. Daniel's sentence required that he serve at least 25 years before even being eligible for parole. By then, he would be in his 70s. Megan, on the other hand, adapted differently. In the beginning, she tried to control her narrative from behind bars. As the years passed, Megan faded into obscurity. She stopped speaking to the press. She lost appeal after appeal. In Claire's absence, her friends tried to hold on to the good memories. Local schools began implementing programs about healthy relationships and warning signs of manipulation. Eventually, the Thompson house sold to a couple from another state. They had no idea about its past. The final chapter of Claire Thompson's life would never truly be closed. And so, while the story began with a betrayal and ended in blood, it didn't vanish into silence.